Hello and welcome to the Schedule channel, and today I'm going to show you guys your next super budget gaming PC that can run your favorite games at 1080p 60 frames per second and 720p 60 frames per second, all at an incredible price point of $310 with only one caveat. Much better. So right off the bat, let me go ahead and state who this $300 gaming PC is and isn't for. Who this PC isn't for is those of you expecting a miracle gaming PC for the incredible price point of $300. It just doesn't work like that, especially if we're working with all new parts for this PC build guide. The games that you'd probably want to run on this gaming PC ultimately won't be at the graphical settings that you'd like, especially when compared to other gaming PCs that your friends might have, because in the end, we're working with $300 worth of PC hardware, which is a really rough price point, especially in the budget realm, since we're going to be doing all this without a graphics card. But now let me tell you who this gaming PC is for. So if you are a aspiring PC gamer and you really want to get into the PC gaming realm, but you cannot spend any more than $300, then I think this PC right here will be a humble starting point for your journey into the PC gaming master race. Also, I think the template I am providing here for you guys today is going to be a great structure for years to come, because unlike consoles, gaming PCs are upgradable. So while this PC may not have the ideal gaming performance you want right now, when you save up more money in the future, you can add in more parts and change out a few things to ultimately get that gaming performance that you want. But despite all that, I still think this $300 gaming PC still puts up a very good fight.
And another one bites the dust. Oh, hey. Come on. Did I call it or did I call it?
So in today's build guide video, I'll be covering all the PC parts, their features, and recommended upgrades if you had a little bit more money to spend on this build guide. And then I'll go ahead and go into the optimization of this $300 gaming PC so we can squeeze the most amount of performance out of it possible to get the most for your money. And then we'll go ahead and transition into the gaming benchmarks, which will be at 1080p and 720p. And then we'll finish out the video with my overall concluding thoughts on this $300 gaming PC. And if you're wondering, you can build this gaming PC yourself using my recent how to build a gaming PC build guide that I released on the channel not too long ago. And even though the parts may be different, the overall building process is going to be nearly the exact same, with the exception of there being a graphics card, because there isn't one in this. So I'll have a link to that build guide below, and yes, the parts may be different, but the interior layout and overall build process is going to be the exact same, so don't worry about it. So if you like PC build guides like this, then do consider subscribing to the Schedule channel, because that is what we're here for. It's getting you the most bang for your buck when it comes to PC gaming. And if you want to become more involved with the channel, I have a really cool Discord server where you can talk to other tech coolies and get to know them more and see what they're into. And of course, I have my Twitter and Instagram that you can follow as well. So all of that will be in the description below, including today's sponsor. So given how dodgy PC part stock has been recently, especially when it comes to all different PC gaming components, especially on Amazon and Newegg, thankfully, Micro Center can come in clutch for your next gaming PC, and they are the sponsor of a lot of the parts in this gaming PC build. So Micro Center has a lot of stock and PC gaming parts that you want, especially PC cases and power supplies. Since those are really low, Micro Center has had no issues with those parts at all, so definitely check them out for that. But aside from that, they are still maintaining their excellent prices and discounts that make them so attractive in the first place. And say you wanted to build a different gaming PC than the one that I have here in my video, and you want to make sure that all the parts are compatible, then through using Micro Center, you can use their system builder and you can see if all the parts can be compatible because it'll do all that work for you. So Micro Center is still making sure you get those really awesome discounts and prices on the PC gaming parts that you want that are in stock. And in the end, if you are going to do any shopping with them, make sure it is online because they emphasize that to reduce the spread of human malware, we want to make sure that all their shopping is done online and not in person. Anyways, I'll have a link to the parts that I used in this gaming PC build guide below, along with their website. So now let's talk about the PC parts and the magic behind this $300 build. And you can find all those parts in the description below to check out their current prices and see if they're in stock. So beginning with the processor and graphics card, we are using the Ryzen 3200G APU. So an APU is essentially a CPU and a GPU in one chip. So all the processing and graphics processing can be done with this processor, which explains why there isn't a graphics card in the system because it is all handled through the processor here in that HDMI port that is on the back of the motherboard. And if you're also curious, this is a 4-core 4-threaded processor and is on the AM4 socket, which means we could put in other Ryzen processors in the future like the Ryzen 3600 or 1600 AF. And speaking of the AM4 socket, for the motherboard, I've chosen the MSI A320M Pro Max motherboard. So, reason why I chose this motherboard is that it's inexpensive and it supports Ryzen 3000 out of the box, which is what we need. And it can support 64 gigabytes of RAM, so that can be like two 32 gig sticks. And it has an open M.2 slot, say if you wanted to upgrade the storage in this PC later on down the road. But the one caveat that I see is that there is no 5 volt or 12 volt RGB headers on this motherboard, which we actually got around thanks to the fans that I used. And now for the RAM, I've chosen 8 gigabytes of 24 megahertz memory from Crucial, and this doesn't just specifically have to be from Crucial, it can be from any RAM manufacturer as long as it's 8 gigabytes and 2400 megahertz in terms of speed. And now for the SSD, I've chosen the Inland 240 gigabyte SSD, and actually I don't recommend getting this one because for $1 less on Amazon, you can get the Silicon Power 512 gigabyte SSD, which offers more storage for $1 less. And that's going to be your primary OS and gaming drive. But say if you upgrade it to a hard drive later on to store all of your Steam library games, you can still have this as the boot drive, but then have your games stored on that really large capacity hard drive. So you can get the fast boot times of the SSD and the large storage capacity of a hard drive. But if you don't have a large Steam library to begin with, then I think this sort of SSD will be okay to manage and work with. And now for the case and power supply. Yes, I used a combo here. I have the Dark Flash DLM21 and the included Vetro 380 watt power supply that comes in this $62 combo, which is a crazy deal. So given how just ludicrous the current stock has been with PC cases and power supplies on Amazon and Newegg, and how overpriced they could be if they start selling from third-party sellers on both sites, I just think this combo here is really adequate for this scale of a gaming PC because the case you're getting is an amazing value and can support higher end components later on, and the power supply is also quite value centered but can be switched out for something better later on because the power supply included in this build is the one caveat. It's probably not going to last more than 2 to 3 years, and if something bad happens to it, it could short all the components in the system, which would kill everything. Which is why I emphasize if you are using this, make sure you use this with a surge protector. That way you can prevent any sort of power supply shortages in the first place. But regardless of that, the case you're getting is just fantastic. The tempered glass side panel you can get opens and closes with a leather hatch, which is just a nice high premium feature you can get in just a really cheap case like this. Also, the build quality is excellent, and if you optimize the fans, say like in a negative air pressure setup, I think you can get some adequate airflow through and out of this case. And then finally, if you didn't catch this by now, the case actually doesn't come with any fans, so we're gonna fix that with our own 3-pack of RGB fans, this time from GIM. Now, you could go with these fans, but I'm actually going to recommend another set that is powered over Molex because with the power supply that's included in the case and power supply combo, it only has 2 SATA power connectors. So say you wanted to throw in another hard drive later down the road, you would have to disconnect the fan controller and use that for your hard drive, which means you wouldn't have pretty looking fans like this in your PC case. So I'm going to recommend that other one. So it's powered over Molex, which is a different type of power connector that basically no hard drives or SSDs use nowadays. And anyways, that is going to provide airflow throughout this case, especially if you're going to be upgrading your components later on, since we're just using a single processor in this build. So if you throw in a graphics card later down the road, you're going to need some more airflow, and luckily those 3 fans will take care of that. And now for upgrades. So say you had an extra $50 to play around with for this gaming PC build, I would go ahead and move from 8 gigabytes of 24 megahertz memory to 16 gigabytes of 2066 megahertz memory, which that upgrade will be linked in the description below, along with an SSD upgrade that I recommend, which would be going to an M.2 512 gigabyte SSD. So that upgrade alone is going to be about $60. And if you had any more than that, I would just go ahead, save up even more, don't spend any more on this system, and just try to shoot for my $500 gaming PC build, which is in the end is going to give you a much better platform to start off with over this one. So now let's talk about optimizing this $300 gaming PC to give you the most frames per second possible. So a cool thing that is in the MSI motherboard that I chose is a feature called Memory Try It. And this will have a long list of memory profiles on board on the motherboard that you can try out yourself with the RAM to see if it'll run at that speed in cast lane C. And the faster the RAM is, the more frames per second you'll get, especially with an APU setup like this. So I was able to achieve a clock speed of 3200 megahertz at a cast lane C of 18 using Memory Try It, and that actually boosted my frames per second on average by 4, which is just a free change and a simple upgrade. But my only disclaimer to that is that since you're going to a really high clock speed and cast lane C that this RAM originally wasn't designed for, you could experience some crashing in games, which out of my testing library of games only occurred in PUBG and Fortnite. All my other games were fine, but I noticed if I ran at that memory speed, sometimes the game would crash. So to reduce that, I choose a lower speed and a lower cast lane C, like 3000 megahertz cast lane C 18 or 2066 megahertz cast lane C 16. And if you want to go a little bit farther, you can actually follow TechYesCity's Windows 10 optimization guide, since we're working with an 8GB RAM system, to free up some memory and just make Windows overall smoother and quicker to use, which I found didn't actually increase the frames per second at all in my tests, but it did increase the minimum frames per second, so you can have just an overall smoother experience since your system won't be dipping down as much, since you'll have a little bit more RAM to work with. So with all of that said, let's finally get into the gaming benchmarks and see how good this $300 gaming PC can perform. And before I get into that, I just want to mention that all the tests were run through my Elgato HD60S Plus capture card, which was then encoded and decoded on my laptop. So there's no stress at all on the gaming PC on this test. So all of the frames per second you see in this benchmarking section are authentic. So with all that said, let's get right into the benchmarks.
Woo! Marcelo! Marcelo! Marcelo!
So now let's finish out with the concluding thoughts on this $300 gaming PC. Like I said at the very beginning of this video, if you have absolutely no more than $300 to spend on a gaming PC, I think this is an okay entry point for getting into the PC gaming master race. But if you have more, like say $100 more to spend, I would just save that and go ahead and shoot for my $500 gaming PC build, since that will give you much better gaming performance with an actual processor and graphics card in one system, along with just better amenities in general when it comes to the storage, power supply, and case. And again, relating to that one caveat I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, the power supply in this system is not going to last forever, and if you wanted a new motherboard or graphics card, you will need to also upgrade the power supply along with that, which may just be natural in the first place, because usually when you get a much more powerful graphics card or a much higher end processor, and along with that a new motherboard, you kind of do need a new power supply in the first place. And really the only graphics card you could throw into the system would have to be a GTX 1050, because that doesn't use any PCI power cables at all, because we have no more with this 380 watt power supply. And as you can see, this $300 gaming PC can play actually a fair amount of games at 1080p and 720p, but as you can see, there are some games that do have some low 0.1% and 1% lows, and that's probably attributed to the 8 gigabytes of memory that we have in this system. And if we bump that up to 16 gigs, we'd probably reduce those a lot. But as we can see, this can play a lot of games, but not all the games. But even so, even the games like Apex Legends that are running at 720p are at least running smooth at 60 frames per second with high 1% and 0.1% low. So I don't think all is gloom with this $300 gaming PC build. It can still run games, but that's just it. However, if you're willing to take a jab at going with used parts for a gaming PC build like this, I would actually look at what Tech by Matt and Greg Salazar have already done with their own individual $300 gaming PC build guides, but those use used parts and they will offer more performance, but in my opinion, not as good of looks. So that is it for today's $300 PC build guide video, and if you have made it all the way to the end of this video, I got a special note for you guys. Well, not really a special note, but just more of a thank you, because these PC build guides are marathons to test, produce, and to film for you guys, so thank you for those of you who have made it to this point in the video. And if you did, that means you probably like my channel, and you should totally subscribe and enable the bell notification button, because I have a review on the Ryzen 3100 and 3300X coming out on May 7th. So you don't want to miss that, because that is going to be so much fun to make, and it's going to test all the things you're probably interested or thinking about right now. Also, I've got my Discord, Instagram, and Twitter you can totally follow if you want to become more involved with the channel, because if you made it this far, you're probably in that group, so go ahead and check those out as well in the description. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and this is the Scoutable channel, signing out.